So how is it that a convict that's doing a life sentence for murder and hostage taking at the castle on the Cumberland, Kentucky's maximum security prison, become friends with the Kentucky Supreme Court justice and the retired warden of that prison over a 30-year period? Bobbie Foust learned the answer to that question in September of 2014. Tell us about it, Bobbie.
Well, on mid-September day, a beautiful day, I went to Eddyville and went to the castle on the Cumberland and climbed all those front steps up and to the prison offices. And the current warden at that time made a place for us and brought in Supreme Court Justice Bill Cunningham and former warden Phil Parker and inmate William Woolum. And inmate William Woolum was the gentleman I was to focus on for the interview. But William Woolum, Bill Cunningham, and Phil Parker had over the period of 30 years become friends. And William being an inmate at that prison, and Bill Cunningham having been the Commonwealth Attorney who prosecuted him for murder and in the hostage taking cases. And Bill had actually offered William, because of mitigating circumstances, Bill had offered William a 10-year prison sentence. William turned it down. Lyon County jury gave him life plus 5 years for having a weapon with which he committed the murder on the prison yard, and the life sentence for the murder itself. So William told me at one time that he had accumulated sentences that totaled life plus 77 years. William told me that he was born into a family of crime. He was born the 15th of 19 children to a poverty-stricken couple. I can imagine them having been poverty-stricken with that many people in a family. They lived in far southeastern Kentucky in a community, the community of Barberville. And William told me that he was arrested for theft the first time when he was 9 years old. He told me that the jailer would not leave him or put him in a cell with an adult inmate at the jail and leave him. The jailer took him home with him, and he slept on the jailer's couch until his case was adjudicated. He didn't tell me exactly what happened during that as a result of that adjudication, but he did tell me that because his family was so poor and there were so many of them, that he was put in foster care and bounced from one foster home to another. And at times he said he would be placed in custody because for placement rather than for punishment, for placement. Simply, in other words, he was given a jail cell because there was no place for him to spend, for him to have a roof over his head and 3 meals a day. So William was born into a tough situation. He said he was born into a family of thieves and stealers and manipulators. 2 of his brothers were also spent time. He didn't tell me a lot about those 2, but 2 of his brothers spent time in the penitentiary. And he said he committed his first adult felony for which he was sentenced as an adult at age 21. He and one of his brothers and another accomplice had committed an armed robbery in Fayette County in the Lexington area, and he was sent to the penitentiary for the first time on 2 10-year sentences for armed robbery. And he said he was 21 years old at that time. After that, William was spent time in the penitentiary, but the situation that developed when he committed the murder for which Bill Cunningham punished him, and for which he was later still in prison when Phil Parker became the warden, occurred in 1981. It was September the 8th, 1981, and the situation was something like this. The two inmates, an older man named Lester Rhodes and a younger man, William thought he might have been, the younger man might have been still been in his teens, maybe just having become 18 or possibly 19, but anyway, he was a younger man. And they were transferred from Kentucky State Reformatory at LaGrange to Kentucky State Penitentiary. And William and some of the other inmates at the penitentiary immediately took this younger man under their wings. William told me they were trying to protect him from Lester Rhodes. Lester Rhodes wanted that young man to stay in wanted him assigned to his cell. Of course, some of the cells at Kentucky State Penitentiary, as you probably know, there's more than one inmate in a cell. So this inmate, Lester Rhodes, wanted the young man in his cell. And William told me the reason for that he was trying to make a sissy out of the younger man. And I inferred from that this older man, Lester Rhodes, was wanting to either rape him or otherwise sexually abuse the younger man. And William and other prisoners were wanting to protect him as best they could. And so the tension began to mount from the very first day there. And as it happened on September the 8th, 1981, the inmates were on the yard, and William was approached by Lester Rhodes, and Lester Rhodes was talking to him about wanting the younger man and telling him telling William that he was stepping on his toes by keeping the younger man out of his cell. And Rhodes, at that time, the dispute escalated to the point, excuse me, little allergy today. The issue escalated to the point that Rhodes actually stabbed William a couple of times. Well, William got away from him at that time, and on this date, and when inmates were when they were assigned to come back into their cell house, they began to gather into the cell house again. There was one of William's friends just placed a knife in his hand and said, "You may need this later." And they went into the cell house, and later on then they went, this was for a count, William told me. So I'm assuming that the inmates are counted. In fact, I've been told they are counted every time they go on the yard and then come back into the cell house. They are counted to make sure nobody has escaped, to be sure that everybody is there. So later in the evening or the afternoon, the inmates were back on the yard. And they were at near a bell tower. I'm not exactly sure whether I have been on the yard at the penitentiary a couple of times. It's not a fun place to be, and I never felt comfortable there, but I always had the warden with me anytime I was there. But I don't know exactly where the bell tower is, but William said they were near the bell tower. And William Rose approached him, and William said, I knew he was in for trouble, and he said I was going to stab him. And so there was an encounter there between William and Lester Rhodes. Lester started to attack William. And William said, I just went crazy on him. He said, I didn't know what I was doing. I stabbed him. I kept stabbing him. And I just lost my mind. He said, I just went crazy. And until in the distance, I heard a shot fired. And he said, and someone shouting, drop the knife, drop the knife. He said he did drop the knife, and he was taken back into the cell house and left there for a few minutes. Then the officers came back I'm not sure why. He didn't explain why they came back, but they came back and got him off his bunk. He said he had lain down on his bunk because of he was exhausted from the fight. And he said he asked the officer, did that inmate die? And the officer said, well, what do you think? And William said that he had stabbed him 52 times. Bill Cunningham told me that he went to Bill Cunningham was still the prosecutor at that time. And he said he went to the autopsy of Lester Rhodes and he counted 56. So Bill and William were a disagreement over how many times that William had stabbed Lester Rhodes. But anyway, he had killed Lester Rhodes, and he told me that the hardest thing about that incident for him was telling his mother that he had killed a man. He said that went through me like a bolt of sorrow. And it was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. Well, William, he is charged, of course, with murder, and Bill offers him a plea deal. He turns it down. He is then tried by a Lyon County jury and found guilty and given the life sentence plus 5 years. And he is serving his sentence at Kentucky State Penitentiary. And at one point, he is transferred to before that happened, a year later, he took a prison guard hostage. And he did that using a gun that he had carved out of soap and painted black with shoe polish. But the officers didn't know the gun was a soap gun or not a real gun. They assumed that somehow contraband was always getting into the prison. So the officers assumed that somehow William had gotten hold of a gun, and they knew that William was a dangerous inmate, a violent inmate. And so Phil Parker had just had 3 years experience as an officer, and at the prison, and he lived near the prison. And Phil had recently, during that time, had a 1-week seminar on conflict resolution and mediation. So he was 28 years old. So the job of negotiating for this officer's life fell to Phil Parker. He said he received a phone call that said, William Woolum has taken a hostage, has a gun to his head, get here quick. Click, the phone went dead. He said that he was at the prison within 5 minutes. And he said, I knew that officer's life was in my hands. And he began to negotiate with William. And William was demanding to see the warden. He said he was telling Phil that he would put a bullet in the officer's head if he didn't let him talk to the warden. Phil told him, I am it. You have to negotiate with me. The warden is not here. The warden was, in fact, out of town. And Phil said through the night, now this call came at 1:30 in the morning on October the 3rd, 1982. William had just been in prison for a little over a year for the murder of Lester Rhodes. And Phil, through all this early morning hours, knew that there was an officer's life in his hands. And he said, we had authorization from the warden to kill William. and said, I spent those hours trying to lure him into a spot where the sniper could take a shot and kill him. And he said, through the night, we kept negotiating. And he said, William would ask for something, but he said, then I would ask for something in return. He said, William would ask for something and I would say, I'll give it to you if you let me talk to the officer. Well, they went on that way through the early morning hours, still with a sniper ready to put a bullet into William Woolum if he happened to be lured into the to position where that could be accomplished. At 8:58 a.m. that morning, William threw out his soap gun, released the officer, and said, "I'm done." They found at that moment that this was a soap gun, so they have it now. They have it in a museum. It has been the prison's museum artifacts have been given to the historical society, so that will be displayed at Rose Hill. Those things, including William's soap gun, will be on display at Rose Hill for the public to see one of these days. Anyway, after this, William was tried again, and he was of course convicted on the attempt to escape and taking a hostage. And during his time, this was part of the time that he had accumulated a life sentence plus 70. He was accumulating this life plus 77 years. Well, life, okay, life, you get life. Well, the 77 years doesn't make any difference. So at this time, there was an exchange program between the state of Florida and the state of Kentucky, and William was sent to a Florida State Penitentiary, and in an exchange program. Now, he didn't explain to me, and I didn't really ask about why the exchange program, but it was just something that the prisons were doing at that particular time. And William said he came to the point while he was there in that prison in 1989. He said he came to the point of such despondency that he said, I was literally one night, this was one incident one night, said I was literally beating my head against the iron bars, trying just to feel the pain, just to feel anything. He said he felt dead. He said he just felt dead inside. And he said, I was crying like a baby and crying out to God. And he said, I came to the point in those hours that I realized that Jesus Christ was all I had. And then he said, as time went on and I continued crying, he said, I realized that Jesus Christ was all I needed. And he said, I was a changed man from that point on. And he, at one point then, I believe it was 2001, he came back to the penitentiary. And by that time, Phil Parker was the warden. And Phil said, well, hello, William, how are you? How have you been? Well, he said, William said it was like a homecoming. He said they talked, and they were developing a friendship, William said, and Phil agreed that they were developing a friendship. And Bill Cunningham told me that William was not the only inmate at Kentucky State Penitentiary that he had developed friendships with. He said he grew up across the street from the penitentiary. His father was the lockmaster at the lock there in Eddyville on the old dam before on the Cumberland River. And his father was the lockmaster. And of course, they were right across the street from the penitentiary. And there were inmates that were called trustees, and they were just allowed to be out in the community doing community service work, which they still are at this point. And Bill then came to see William again, and through the years they became friends. And eventually both Bill and Phil were trying to help William get a parole he was eligible. He became, despite all the sentences he had, he was eligible for parole in 2016. Well, he was granted parole in 2016, but now he was not finished with the penal system. He had a 10-year federal sentence hanging over him for mail fraud. And I believe he said 10-year sentence he had hanging over him, but for good time, the minimum sentence on that, the minimum amount he would need to serve would be about 3.5 years. And he did in fact serve another, that federal sentence. He was hoping that the federal government might drop that sentence or those charges against him, but there was no such thing happening. He spent about 3 or 4 years in a federal prison in Pekin, Illinois. I'm not real sure where Pekin, Illinois is. I think it's north of Chicago, but I haven't really found it on the map yet. But anyway, he was released from prison. I believe it was in 2020, and he is a free man. If he commits no further crimes, he will be a free man for the rest of his life. And I'm sure he still has to check in with parole departments, but he told when he came back to Eddyville, he told Phil, and Phil asked him Phil was asking him what had happened to him. He said, "I have found God." And Phil told me, he said, "I knew at that point that he was a changed man." And so the three men, the three men are all Christian men. Phil Parker's a Christian man. Bill Cunningham is a Christian man. They practice Christian practices. They are Christians as to the best of their ability, and so is William Woolum. So they have a brotherhood there, and they told me the keystone to their friendship was mutual respect. Through the 30 years, they had developed mutual respect for one another. William admired Phil for his abilities with the way that he had negotiated with him and had gotten him through the night. And Bill admired William for his tenacity and for the fact that he had come through what he had come through. And Bill had a lot of empathy for William. He said, but by the grace of God, I would be here in William's place. If I had been born into a family of 19, poverty-stricken family, into a poverty-stricken county with 15th of 19 children, I might be here in the prison where William sits, and he might be prosecuting me. So Bill understood that it was simply by the grace of God, by the grace of his birth, that he was not the criminal and William the prosecutor, and vice versa. So that's how their friendship developed. And Bill is still in contact with William. And Bill gave me Phil's phone number. Phil now lives in Florida. I intended to call him, but I had so much going on with family issues, the babies that are about to be born today, and other family issues. I haven't called Phil, but I thought I would, because I did email William Woolum and just let him know my prayers were with him, and I hope that he gets the job that he is being interviewed for, I believe, today. So I do hope that William Woolum is able to spend the rest of his life as a free man.